Well, hello everybody. Here I am. I'm at the Biosecurity Roundtable Conference in October, and I just wanted to make up a short video. Within these videos, you're going to see, this is poorly done. It's just, corroboration that I was there and that I attended the thing. But one of the greatest things that concerned me about this containment and asset-based protection is that they've completely missed the issue with lantana, and lantana wasn't even mentioned on this day, nor was green cestrum or any of the other major players that we face. All there was people with their hand out trying to get money out of the new federal biosecurity officer. But at the end of the day, they've completely turned their back on lantana, and there is no significant operational practices in place at any level, at local government level, at councils, at state government. There's zero. At federal, there's zero. All we have is very pitiful land care programs which run on volunteer basis and do virtually nothing on the size of this problem. It's currently growing at 4 million hectares a year, and we're just getting started on filming and processing all of this information to get people to understand that when this material gets access to water, roadways, drainage ditches, all of those particular issues, it spreads at such a enormous rate that all of our properties are basically in harm's way. And the way that the government is changing the process with councils means that trying to bring in a risk assessment based program so that they can give up on it completely, and then we are all in absolute hell on earth. Basically, the birds fly this material for a zone of influence of about 5 kilometres from the actual infestation, and those birds die exactly the same as cattle, horses, all other animals die from liver destruction. And basically they then promote this material from the watercourse areas up into the high country areas, and then they flood back down much quicker. Now, the roadway basis of that system is exactly the same as the waterway. It actually propagates this material downstream in such a massive area. So if you look at the Canberra on a road and you see it sitting on both sides of the road, you'll notice to the lower side of the road and where the drainage ditches converge, that material is much greener. Now, in our harsh Australian environment, this is absolutely exponentially spread by the fact that a lot of times of the year our climate has very little food basis for these animals, so they particularly go after the seeds of these plants and spread them even faster. So it is a change of the way this material moves, and the complete government's lack of understanding at any level or will to protect our lands and our farms and our homes. And this has a catastrophic effect on our land prices, and will do in the future. This is the beginning of what is coming, and we're seeing properties selling for half of their value to this influence. That especially plays out even worse when you look at areas that are of low use, areas that are not being used very much. Well, they expand at an even higher rate because there's no actual intervention or movement through the material, so there's no checks in place. And that's something that makes that even more frightening, because when you put those infestations on high country and then spread that down on both sides of that high country, it makes the zone of influence completely different. Yeah, the government has on documentation this material having moved thousands of kilometres in one flood, and yet they do not recognise that water moves this material at all. And there's a reason they don't. It's because of the legal and financial obligations to contain this material, which in the Biosecurity Act of 2014, it clearly states that you cannot release this material to the environment. Now, I've been informed by some of my farmers that there are moves now, apparently, by the government to actually rewrite the Biosecurity Act and to remove that from the Biosecurity Act. When they do this, and they will do it because they don't answer to the people, when they do it, our land prices are going to plummet. We are going to have properties that are virtually worthless. We have an older, growing, elderly population who have sometimes lost their partner, and there's no possibility that these people, our grandparents, can possibly fight this disease and this cancer on their lands. And the government has completely written all of those people off. And that's factual. The councils tell you that. They say, oh, we only protect very, very narrow assets. And that's one of these things that's in this roundtable conference. They list that as being they only protect very, very minimal assets. That's why they've taken over our lands. Our lands at Sanford and all the way out through Debra, Mount Mee, they actually have protection zones on our garden beds. And nobody is jumping up and down. Well, actually they are. People come to me every single day in tears, crying. They've bought a property and it's absolutely infested. And then when they've gone to try and protect their asset, they're told they can't take action to protect their asset. In Sanford, I have people coming to me saying, I'm not even allowed to mow the regrowth, to deal with the regrowth, to deal with the weeds in the regrowth. The government is absolutely bankrupt and desperate. The Prime Minister has written this subject off. Your premiers have written this subject off. Your Agricultural Minister has written this subject off. Biosecurity, head of Biosecurity, Malcolm Letts, told me straight up that there is no works and no money for lantana. That's it. It's done. It's finished. This material expands at 4 million hectares a year. The World Wildlife Federation say it's a catastrophe that New South Wales clears 5,000 hectares of land a year. Do you know how many times 5,000 goes into 4 million? And not a word is being said by not one wildlife, not one green group, not the Greens. None of these people are talking about any of this stuff. So at the end of the day, it's up to us to take this to the government and say, hey, listen, get your hands off our lands. You cannot be buying property and then just simply providing a habitat to the wildlife where you have no financial benefit from that land. You are buying a liability, and that must be identified. Otherwise, you have no prospect for the future with that land. It's a liability, and the government is tying your hands, saying you cannot even protect that property. So why would you purchase it? The government is taking over your lands because all of these reserves, these national parks, these state forests are completely, absolutely inundated with these materials, and they're flooding back out of these environments. And the National Parks and Wildlife will not give me access to map out these materials. Why are they hiding? Why is the Premier condoning this? Why isn't the Premier stepping in, as I've asked, to clear the way so I can have access? When you think of that zone of influence, the amount of area around those materials, you start to understand and get a proper picture for exactly how corrupt our biosecurity departments, our DAF, and our Prime Minister and Premiers are. They will not allow you access to see these materials and understand that your properties are not very far from these borders of these environments that are so badly infested, and you are paying the price for it. That's why they've commandeered your land. Theirs is completely written off. Where does it stop? We need our lands to be taken back, our national parks to be properly protected as they were supposed to be. We should be very, very unhappy about what has happened to date. But if they keep getting away with this, if the councils keep expanding these areas, then at the end of the day, there is going to be more of our families that are crying and purchasing these properties and then being stuck with something they can't sell. A lot of these people are buying these properties at full retail price, and the property is worth half of that. Aren't the banks responsible for some of this? For researching and understanding that these people are buying something they can never sell. And then you look at the older population and you start to understand, how the heck are they going to survive in this environment? There is nowhere that anybody can prosper under this current system that they have in place. And we have to very, very seriously understand that when these roundtable party conferences come up and people are doing these things, we need to pay attention to what's being said, because there is that much corruption in trying to cover up how big an issue these things have become. And that's one weed. That is not all 31 other ones. There are some enormous combinations of those weeds that are happening now that we really must start to demand to allow access, and for us to be funded to be able to document these materials. You know, there's a whole reason why this corruption has existed in the first place, and why the Premier continues to corruptly cover it up. Nobody wants to stay, well, okay, this has happened, now let's get after this. Let's get this sorted out. Let's start to put plans in place and fix these issues. We have to rehabilitate our nation's forestry and take back these lands, because the future with how it's being run now and the cover-ups is going to have a horrific effect on our children in the future, and on us being able to grow and supply food to our nation. That is the real key to this. With these infestations throughout all of these range countries, means that they have a zone of influence on each side of those ranges for thousands of kilometres. That's literally proven already by government documentation. So why are we pretending this doesn't exist, as our waterways are completely choked with these materials right in our cities? And in the next months, you're going to see a lot more filming of those areas close to home that's going to drive this home. Remember that they have a zone of influence 5 kilometres around those areas in a flat country environment. But if we add elevation to those things where they're in a range, that can be hundreds or thousands of kilometres. And then the property becomes virtually worthless. And when people are driven off those lands, or people have bought lands for future investment, like in Sanford, I've had people come forward and say the council has now reneged on the development permit that was on the land, and why those people purchased the land, so that in the future, when they were finished with the land, they could then develop it, make some money off it, and prosper. That's the reason they bought the land. But now they can't do anything with that land. They are virtually just custodians for the animals, because the government has completely decimated all of our national parks and state forests, our reserves, all of those places. So we need to take a very, very, very strong view and start to look very strongly at all of these scenarios and see how many animals are dying because of lantana infestations. It's just catastrophic that these people are suffering this, and we need to deal with it, because there is nobody else going to do this. You know, I don't need this headache. I don't need all of this work or the monetary cost of these things. But if I don't do this, no one else has. I'm the first one to ever seriously take this to the government. And I'm not finished. I won't quit until we get a result, until we have proper eradication plans in place, and we are conducting and meeting the growth rates of these materials. Because until we meet the growth rates, we are losing country at 4 million hectares per year. And that's not the end result. It grows from there. It keeps expanding from there. So please join the fight. Please share the information. Please discuss it with family and discuss it with friends. And ask the councils. Ask the people that are responsible for making these decisions in biosecurity that said lantana's completely written off. We're not interested anymore. So where does it go? How does it get better? How does it change? It doesn't. It just keeps growing at 4 million hectares a year with no operational systems in place to eradicate it. What is the outcome? It's a foregone conclusion. And yet nobody wants to hear this. Nobody wants to understand how many animals If there's 10 animals per hectare, that's 40 million animals a year that are dying if there's just 10 animals per hectare. And we all know there's an enormous amount more than that. And yet not one environmental group, not one wildlife group, the endangered species section run by the government all pretend this doesn't exist. How can the endangered species section of the government collect funding and pretend that the catastrophe that the government is causing is non-existent? Anyway, look, I'm Gary from Lantana Removal Queensland, 0449 986 880. We operate out in Narangba, and we are doing our best to bring this information to people's attention. So please join the fight. Please join our Lantana Removal Queensland group and help to spread the word and help to get the message out to people. Anyway, I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you for that. Bye-bye.